This week, I thought we would talk about negotiating skills. And that is a very important part of what we do is we got to be great at negotiating terms, right? Because that's part of the business. And so I ask a couple of questions here. What two principles do we make buying decisions? What two principles do we make buying decisions?
I don't
Any
understand the question.
Okay, maybe it's not written really well, but we either make emotional decisions or logical decisions.
Hmm.
Okay. Which of the two is most powerful in short-term decision making?
Emotional.
Emotional. So people make, think about it when you're showing homes and they walk into one home and it's like, oh, this is the one that's in my dreams. And then they're like, I want it. And then they just make quick decisions. So a lot of times emotional decision making is part of what we're dealing with. So you have to kind of realize and define those two types of decision making. And you can always ask yourself, is this person making a logical decision or are they making an emotional decision? Sometimes we go in and they're like all in love with the home, and then you're working up a contract and then they don't sign it, and the next day they decided they don't want it because their emotions got in front of their logic. And then when their logic kicked in, then they realized the home wasn't suitable for, because it was one bedroom short for one of the children or something like that. And now they're making a logical decision. So I think these things are important to understand when we're negotiating, and knowing where is the decision coming from. Is it a logical decision or an emotional decision? And therefore you can be more powerful at helping with the negotiations. So what are the three most important times you're negotiating terms with customers in your real estate business? What are the three most important times? Come on now. Do you negotiate for them at any time? How's that?
Okay, we never
When?
negotiate about.
I
Really.
mean, when they get an offer,
No, when you make an offer for a buyer, you're negotiating terms.
right?
If
After the inspection?
you could be negotiating, but the three most important times are when you're sitting down at a listing appointment, right?
Right,
Okay.
right.
When your seller gets an offer on their property,
Okay.
and when you have a buyer ready to make a decision to buy a property. Those are the three biggies. But then there's all kinds of interims, right? Just like Nick said, he said negotiating after the inspection, because now there's potentially requests for repairs and stuff like that. That's all negotiation time, right? So we're going to focus on those three today, but I think some of the tips that I'm going to give you, they come from me being in the business mostly, are going to be valuable even in the small negotiating points, such as after the inspections. So let's talk about the listing terms first. So these are tips. So the first thing I'm going to tell you, when you go to your listing appointment, your listing paperwork should be filled out almost completely, ready to go for a signature. Not blank, filled out. Why do I say that? We already talked about emotional decision making. Do I need to say more? Because when they make that decision and say yes to you, you want to make it easy. Okay. The second reason is in the forms, there's blank lines, right? If we leave them blank, what does that signify? What does it signify if we leave blank lines? It's negotiable.
Hmm,
Come on now, think about it. If it's filled in, it doesn't come as appearance to be negotiable. So when it comes to your real estate commission, wouldn't it be best to have that line filled in when you are there with the paperwork, already typed nice and neat? Because you want to give the impression, which you should have, your own personal decision of what your worth is. I'm worth 6% commission. And if it's filled in, then it doesn't come across as negotiable. Can it still be negotiated? Absolutely,
Yes.
right? So you would do the same thing if you would do if you were changing a contract while negotiating it. You would cross it off and write in the negotiated amount and everyone initial it. No big deal. So think about it. So there's only two things that I wouldn't have filled in, but everything else completely ready to go for signature. And that would be the date to start and the list price, because those could be negotiated based on how fast they want to sell and things like that. And with a range of value from your comps. So that's tip one for your listings. Make sure you complete the paperwork as much as possible. Make it simple for you to just explain it and sign. Make sense? So if you're not doing that, hopefully that's a really strong tip. So what do you do if you're struggling with the commission at a listing appointment? They don't want to pay, they think you're worth nothing, but you should do all the work, and or they're comparing you against another agent. What's your negotiation ammunition? What can you do? What should you do? Think, come on now, you've been
You have,
doing this.
you should have stuff that shows your worth,
There
like,
you go.
in past listings, you can show them where you are in the market, what you're gonna do for them, the type of pictures you're gonna take, the videos, things like that, the open houses.
Yes. You go back to what you do. Let's look at this again, and you go back, and if you're using our listing presentation, we have an 18-point marketing plan. So you go back and let's look at this again, and let's review, because maybe I didn't cover something well enough for you. Look at all I do. So you have to pop up and build up your value. Okay. And then ask them to sign it again. So what can you do? And I'm going to give you some kind of more advanced negotiating power and a listing appointment. What can you do if they're just stuck? Maybe they're good on the price, which the property is going to sell, but they're stuck. They're really resistant on choosing you at that moment because they're not wanting to pay that commission. What can you do? What I did is I looked at what can I eliminate that I would have to eliminate to be able to bring my commission down. And say, well, if that's all, I get to work with, I do believe in your price, then I'm not going to be able to do this, and this. You eliminate services. They don't want services eliminated. And then you would come back and explain to them why it's a bad idea for them to eliminate some of these services that expose their home to most buyers, which would be willing to bring a higher price to the table. Okay. So one more, even further in depth, is you could go through that whole routine, and then they're you can kind of tell that they're wanting to hire you because they're really talking to you. They're just trying to negotiate for themselves. And what I did was I come back and I said, listen, it's not to your benefit for me to take anything away from all the things that I do, because I know how valuable it is in getting a buyer that's going to pay the price we want for your home. So how about we do this? And then I say, you know what? You know, I'm asking for 6% and you're telling me you're only gonna give me 5. Since all this marketing side is coming out of that paycheck, me go ahead and do all of my marketing, we'll agree. And then can we agree that the buyer's agent gets 2.5? Negotiate 2.5. So you still retain 3 and you're giving in 2.5, that's 5.5. So that's still trying to negotiate. At the end of the day, you might end up with 2.5 and 2.5, but if you don't try to negotiate for yourself, then you're leaving opportunity or money on the table or giving away what your worth is. So you have to try to negotiate.
So Scott, what I've been doing is just telling them when it comes to commission is I just say, I only get 3%. And usually that gets their attention because everybody else is saying 6, but I tell them I only get 3%.
Mhm.
And then let's talk about what you want to pay to the buyer's agent.
There you go. That's
The-
very
the-
good.
Yeah, that is very good.
That is very good. So, and that explanation should be part of your, part of how you have the conversation is yes. So you might talk about how it's divided up. So, you know, if you get the buyer, you get the whole thing, obviously, but as a listing agent in doing all the marketing and all of this service, again, you got to build value is out of the 3%, not out of the 6%. And then whoever, you know, is fortunate enough, and I tell them, I want to find the buyer. I mean, I basically say, you hired me because you think I'm good at finding the buyer. And I'm going to do everything I can to find that buyer. Because I want to take care of you and I want to sell your home. I want you to get the most money. And I want to earn the whole commission. I mean, essentially, that's what I want to do. I'm not just going to pop it on the MLS and wait for another agent to bring a buyer. I'm gonna be out there working hard to find that buyer as well. So I'm interested in getting the whole thing done for you. How about if you're struggling with the list price? That's negotiating. What is your ammunition to, come back and get them to reconsider where their thought process is and bring it down to reality?
With that, I look at what's out there, what's right around their house. They
Mhm.
always know what their neighbors are selling their houses for.
Absolutely.
So they'll tell you, well, the guy up the block, and I had a perfect example of this. Had a house on Hoover, and the person up the block was selling it for 253, and the house wasn't as nice as her. But I said, I would suggest we go 245 only because this, and this is where to go. And I showed her that the one that was 253 was on the market for a little while. And, we already had her in a contract on a sale on a house. So, let's get some people in there right away and everything. Well, I was just talking to her. It's sold. It's closing in April, beginning of April. And I was talking to her the other day because we're doing the appraisal. And she had mentioned that the house up the block, they fired their realtor, who was those 1% people, which I also explained that to her. And they got another realtor in there, and now they have it listed for 225.
Wow.
So still hasn't gotten the contract yet. But we got hers in the contract in 9 days, and she knows it's 9 days. I said about a week. She said, nope, 9 days. I said, okay,
That's okay.
9 days.
Hey, aren't we're pretty close though, huh? I mean, that
Yeah.
shouldn't be nothing to complain about, but
No, she's happy with it. I mean, she's just
yeah,
kidding.
so the correct thing would be to go back, go back. Let's look at the comps again and
And
just
show
go
how long
through
they've been
them
on the market.
and focus on how long it's been on the market. And so it just like Nick said, typically if there's a home in the vicinity, in the neighborhood or whatever, that's just completely out of the world on the price, it's on the market, it's for sale. They don't look at it as it has to sell before, it's a good comp. And they always say, well, they're asking blah, 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 blah for that one. And so that's what they're trying to base their decision on. And so you have to be prepared for that. So you don't really use those as your comps, but you should print out those MLS sheets and have them available. And so that you know that's what they're going to do. And you pull it out and you say, I'm imagining you're talking about this one and basically plop it in front of them and say, anybody can ask anything for their home, but I thought we were here because we had a goal of selling your home. Okay. And I don't know who made the decision to price that home that way. I'm going to tell you that it's probably the owner of the home overpowered the agent. And unfortunately, I'm not one of those agents to get overpowered because we want to sell. And at that price, I can assure you that home is just going to sit there and be on the market forever. How can anyone consider buying that home when you look at all of these other ones? Can you please explain that to me? So these are negotiating skills. But that's it. So those are the two big hurdles with listings, right? Commission and price, typically. And those are the ways that you can handle them. And I talked to it very quickly, so there's, it's probably more involved than what I just said. But if you're just, if an owner is saying, well, I'm only going to give you 4% commission total, and you're just saying, okay, then you're not really doing yourself service. You need to say, you know what, let's go back. Can I review my marketing plan with you again? And then if you're comparing with another agent, of all of this stuff, can you tell me, are they doing this much stuff, or, are they doing less, or did they even tell you what they're doing? And most of the time it'll be less, or they didn't really tell me. They said they'd put a sign in the yard and put it in the MLS. Well, I would imagine that's about what that's worth, but I thought you wanted somebody that's going to go out there and fight for you and bring a buyer that's going to pay really good money for your home. So that's what you have to do for yourself. If you're not doing this, this is the time to make a decision to change that for yourself. Anyone else have anything else that they want to ask or add about the listing negotiating time? Yes, no, I guess no. Okay, let's talk about a contract for a seller. So the seller gets an offer, and I'm going to give you some solid tips here. So when it comes to the written offer, what is the escrow deposit amount that you should accept on the contract? I know what
I try to
most
get-
people say.
I try to get 1%.
1%, absolutely. So if it's 300,000, it's 3,000. The 100,000, it's 4,000. It's not very strong, and me and Frank's recently talked about this. In most contracts, it's $1,000 we see. But if you're representing the seller and you want this to have more beef for your seller and more value, you should ask for at least 1%. Okay. If they're serious, what's the problem? You have contingencies. The contingencies are the same. If you don't like the inspection, you can back out. If you don't get financing approval, you can back out. You get it back. But I just think it has a lot more weight if you get 1%. How about inspection days? Its default is 15. I think most of us know that's too long, correct?
That's too long.
So it would be, highly advisable to try to crank that down to 5 days, maybe 7 at the most. So always try to, shorten that, because essentially you're just taking the home off the market and you're giving them a long time. And when it comes to people getting prepared to move and stuff, because if somebody backs out on the 15th day, and there's a good chance your seller's already got moving companies all planned and all this stuff, or they've eliminated some of their valuables that they weren't going to keep, and now they lost the contract. So here's a contingency that I caution you on accepting with
Sale.
on this, the sale of the buyer's home. Okay, so I've had a lot of conversations with agents lately where that's been a contingency that was put into the contract. They were willing to offer a really good amount of money compared to the list price. But then they put this sale contingency in there and then, and find out that the homes aren't even on the market yet. There's
I'd
no
like to-
contract on them.
I'd
Okay,
like to talk a little more about that, Scott, because the struggle is real right now for buyers. They don't want, they might be ready to pull the trigger,
mhm,
but they're afraid, they're still concerned that, and if anybody else is finding differently, I'd like to know, they're still concerned that they aren't going to be able to find a place to live. I mean, it's,
okay.
and it's hard to reassure them of that.
Yeah, so when I'm talking right now, I'm representing a seller. Okay,
Okay,
so my
well-
seller, we get an offer, the home that they have a contingency against is not under contract yet.
I have no problem with what you're saying. I agree with
Okay.
you. If I'm representing the seller, I'm telling them not to take a home sale contingency.
That's
But-
exactly right.
But okay, maybe it's a conversation for another day.
Well,
Well, we're not
we're gonna
talking
talk
about
about the
selling.
buyer's side, but there's nothing you can do regarding what you're saying, Liam. People have to make a full decision to pull the trigger. But if I'm representing a seller and and my own son had one, so I helped him through it. It was kind of ironic story, but an offer was made contingent on the buyer selling their home, and their home wasn't even on the market yet. So they made the decision to go put it on the market really quick. But I'm going to tell my seller, we lose all of the control. We're at the mercy of them pricing their home right, agreeing to a contract, and we don't know when that's ever going to happen. Now, if it's under contract, it could be a little bit more acceptable, but you need to, dive in and say, is it past the contingencies yet, or what could go
Right.
wrong with that deal before we make an offer? Because what happens is you're pulling your seller's home off the market, and then with no control now, zero control. So
Right.
essentially, the reality is that buyer's not ready to buy yet. They're not positioned to purchase. They're not. And so what the story should be to the list or the buyer's agent is, hey, listen, the sellers would entertain your buyer, but you need to go get the buyer ready to make the commitment. They're not ready. So you go find a buyer for your home, and if you get it under contract, come back and talk to us. But in the interim, we're not taking this home off the market with that kind of contingency. So that's something to really consider. As far as the buyer not deciding or to put their home on the market because they're afraid they're not going to find something, there's nothing you can do to control that. The buyer has to be committed to be putting themselves in position. Now you can work with the buyer and try to get a seller to agree to those terms, but if I'm the listing agent, it ain't gonna happen, because it's detrimental to my seller to do that, in my opinion.
Well, let's talk about it from a different way, if you
Sure.
wouldn't mind.
Yeah.
If I have a seller and they want to list their home, but they're
Right.
afraid they won't find a place to buy,
Okay.
what kind of what kind of advice would you give to them?
Well, the only advice I can give to them is that they need to, can I share homes with you and we can shop a little bit before, but you're going to have to, to commit to this. You're going to, there's not much you can tell them except for, maybe they can make a rent a vacation home or something in the interim, but that's just part of doing it.
They all love that.
Well, there's nothing, it is part of how it works.
I know. I just wondered if you had some magic.
There's no
word
magic,
for that.
no magic answer for that one.
Okay.
Scott,
Yes,
if they do offer, if they do want that contingency that they need to sell their house first and it's not even on the market yet, like you said, but could you negotiate that with a timeline saying, okay, we'll accept that as long as the house is sold by
Well,
30 days or
it,
whatever
it's actually already part of the addendum,
that's in there? Okay.
but the problem is it's so far out.
Yeah,
You're
lost 30 days on the
losing
market.
time on the market
Yeah.
and you possibly missing the buyer that you really needed. So it makes all the sense in the world to say, go find a buyer for your home. And when you have it under contract, come back and we'll talk about it.
If
That's
it's still
basically
there.
saying, go get ready to really be able to purchase, because they can't
Okay.
purchase the home.
Yeah.
And because we have a lot of times people misprice their homes and stuff like that. So, let's say their home's worth 350 and they make the realtor put it on the market for 400. You can't control it.
Yeah.
You're totally take all your control away, because you can control if your seller needs to change their price, you and your seller could change the price, but you can't say, oh, you've priced your home too high and you need to bring it down so you get a contract on it so we can do business. So that's what the problem is. I don't recommend that you do, you advise your seller. I would just advise my seller, even if they offer, in this case, they actually offered full price. It's enticing, right? But
Yeah.
they weren't ready to sell, or I'm sorry, weren't ready to buy. And so there's nothing wrong. Hey, if you're serious about buying this home, go get yourself ready. If we don't have a deal going already, come back and talk to us. It's not that we won't do business with you, but make sure you're ready to buy a home.
Okay, Scott, you said the contingency is already in the contract.
No, in the addendum, the timeline that it has to sell.
And I'm sorry, I'm getting a little confused. Where is that?
It's in the addendum for the sale of a buyer's home contingency.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so
Okay, oh, let me go back to that. I'm not talking about on the buyer's side. I'm talking about on the seller's side. And I thought that was what Kate was talking about too. Kate, did I misunderstand that?
well, it's going to be a contract form between the two parties.
Right, understood. But if the seller, I thought I must have lost track, but I thought the seller, we were talking about if the seller wasn't quite ready, if they needed to find a home to buy.
No,
Oh,
there is
yeah,
no
so you're-
such thing. No such thing.
Okay, we're talking about the contingency then.
Yeah. No, you can't, you're never gonna, you
Okay.
can't, once a seller decides to hire you to sell their home, they have to agree to sell their home.
Right.
They
That's
can't
what I
say,
thought.
but if I can't find a home, I can back out of the deal. That doesn't, no, they have to be ready, committed to sell.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Regardless of anything, they have to sell.
All right, thank you. I just wanted to clarify it for
Shush.
myself.
Okay, so here's something else. When you're negotiating a contract, whether you're on the seller side or the buyer side, the timeliness of response to negotiations. And the reason I talk about this is when you're drilling down and trying to leverage your customers' side of the deal, I'm going to tell you it's always advisable to not make immediate responses to negotiation. So in other words, let's say we're talking about the sale price only, which is one of the big ones. And let's say it's on the market for 350. they offer 325, they give you 24 hours to respond. So when I wouldn't immediately respond, I would wait pretty much the 24 hours. Because if your buyer or your seller wants 340 or 345, then respond. And what'll happen is they'll either agree to that or make another counter offer. And this is stronger in that part and negotiating back and forth. So now they come back and say, no, well, okay, we'll give you 330 and we're at 345. I would wait, at least 24 hours again before I respond, because if you respond instantly, it sounds like you're more negotiable. Okay. Then if you set on it, it's like, no, we're standing, because then if it's a decision where they want that house, they're going to, consider coming up to the price that the seller wants. I'm talking on the seller side, but it could be on the buyer side as well. But what I suggest you do is don't make immediate responses. You may know what your client's decision is or your customer's decision is, but just give it a little space. And therefore they will possibly pull the trigger at that response a lot better than if you did an instant response. Does that make sense to you? Am I explaining that well? But it is true. I did that a lot. In not rushing the responses, because then you usually get what you want when you don't. So what else? Multiple offers. Not seeing as many of those, but we are seeing them. How do you handle multiple offers? You always inform all parties that there are multiple offers, and then request that they send their highest and best. That doesn't mean that that's what they have to accept as the highest and best. They can negotiate one of the contracts. But in fairness to all parties, that would be the right thing to do.
But you would, at what point do you do that? Because if you get an offer, let's say
Mhm.
we had our open house, and we got two people come up and say, okay, we want to make an offer.
Mhm.
At that point, nothing's been accepted. So I could say there are multiple offers on the table. But if I accept an offer and the next day somebody comes in with an offer, I have to tell them we already have it under contract, but we'll take a backup contract, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to decide. up
I'm
front.
talking when you have multiple offers and nothing's been accepted yet.
Okay.
Once you have a contract, you're obligated to that contract. Anything else on the seller side on a contract? So we talked about the escrow deposit being at least 1%, not just 1,000. Not to consider a contract if there's a sale of buyer's home contingency. If the home isn't even on the market yet. And then even if it's under contract, you still want to dig deep to make sure you feel comfortable that contract is going to go to the finish line if you decide. But at the same time, when there's that contingency, you should be able to negotiate a bit of a stronger sale price for your home, because they're putting a heavy contingency on that sale. So that part should work out in the seller's advantage, right? As far as the price they get for their home. So you wouldn't want to take a much lower price, accept a much lower price and have that contingency. That contingency should be able to leverage the seller's sale price at a higher amount. Purchase contract for the buyers. What are some of the negotiating ways? One is you always want to make sure you explain what's going on in the market to the buyers so they know what to expect, and give them some good insights. Probably pull comps and share comps with them, and recommend that before they even make an offer. I know you want to make an offer on this home, but before we do that, let me pull some comps up and see kind of where we are as far as what, a correct offer would be. That's my job. So take the time to do that. If it's a buyer, so this is, now remember, we're representing, right? So if it's a buyer, I would only offer $1,000 escrow deposit. That's my buyer. I'm not the seller in this case. Always request a quick response to the offer. That doesn't mean the seller has to respond in that amount of time. I often get that. Oh, the seller was supposed to respond to me by today and they didn't respond. They don't have to respond. It's just that means that the buyer no longer has to buy the property if they accepted all the terms the buyer offered on the property. That's all that means. Does that make sense? Do you understand what I'm saying? But often gets misunderstood by some realtors that it's required. It's not required.
I do want to ask something about that, or say something about that. When I first started in real estate, I was told that if that date changed, it needed to be corrected on the contract. Then I was told at a later time, it did not need to be changed. It could just be that the proof that it was moving forward was just that the people had signed it.
Correct. You don't have to change that date.
And I've quit changing it, but some people still insist.
No, there's no reason to change it. That has nothing to do with anything.
Right.
That was just what the buyer requested. But if the seller doesn't respond in that time period, but then responds the next day and they agree and go into contract, all you do is, sign the contract and correct the terms, not that date. That date has nothing to do with it. So that's not necessary. Here's a couple more things. Let's see how we're doing on time. If I were representing a buyer, I would always ask for the seller to buy a home warranty. Why not? Few $100 more for my buyer. It's peace of mind for the first year. Seller doesn't have to accept it, but if you ask me this question, although let me rephrase that. A year ago when sellers were getting all the offers they could care for, that might be different. So the market can kind of dictate asking some of these things, but in today's market, I would ask, hey, let's ask the seller to buy you a home warranty. Peace of mind for the first year of ownership. And I don't keep up on what I'm guessing. They're somewhere around $600 or something like that. There's an amount that you can put in there, but you should keep, check with some of the home warranty companies. The Old Republic is the one that most of our agents use. And you should get some of their brochures. They're in our offices. If you are able to stop by our offices, they're usually in the agent rooms. But there's nothing wrong with asking for a home warranty. So that works in the best interest of your buyer, to give them comfort for the first year of ownership. And I think they can renew if they decide on that. And another area of the contract that I often see where if you're working for the buyer that's not really marked correctly, it's a check one thing, and that is about special assessments. If you look at special assessments, there's a checkbox required or suggested. It says if nothing's checked, then a default goes in, but it's line 194 and 196. And this basically says for 194, seller shall pay installments prior to closing and buyer after closing. And 196, seller shall pay in full prior to closing. So if you're representing a buyer now, take in mind that probably 99% of our contracts don't have a special assessment, but if they happen to have one and you're writing an offer, so it's always the buyers writing the offer and making the offer to the seller, who would you want responsible to pay most of the costs? The seller. So if you put in there that the seller is required to pay in full by time of closing, then the seller is going to pay the special assessment off. Now, there may be cases where they won't take payments or pay it off. It only can be done in payments. There's nothing you can do about that. Whatever the government is, controlling that decision. But if it were a special assessment and it could be paid in full, then of course I'd want the seller to be responsible for that.
God, I'm pulling up the contract actually for that section because it's always tricks me there. I mean, I always default to option A,
Yeah.
but doesn't it say something about, here we go. Something about if something can be paid in full. And like your taxes can be paid in full, but I guess that's not a special assessment.
No, taxes are not a special assessment. A special assessment, an example is if they, paved the road. And now they're assessing every owner that has frontage on that road money on a payment plan, or they, they replace the street lights. That's going to be a small one, but a more expensive one would be repaving the road.
Yeah,
When they
Cape Coral
repave the
has a
road,
water assessment.
I'm sorry.
Cape Coral has a water assessment. They're putting in new water systems.
Okay,
So
there you go.
Okay.
And
So like,
yeah,
let's say it's a condo or a townhouse community and they've received a letter saying that the roof for buildings 1 through 5 are going to be replaced and it's going to cost each owner X amount of dollars. That would be an assessment then, right?
um,
but that shouldn't happen, right?
no,
The condo
because,
insurance should
well,
pay for it.
that could happen. I don't know if that would actually fall under this, because it's usually your governmental assessments.
Okay,
But that should very well be disclosed on the
right.
condominium disclosure. So whenever you negotiate a contract for your buyer, you should be asking to see that document before you make the offer, so you understand if there's something in there that would alter your decision of how much you offer on the property, if there was something like that.
And what
Now,
if the seller,
condominium should have reserves for doing things like the, re-roofing the properties and stuff like that. That's what they're supposed to be doing. However, there could be, special circumstance. I think one recent one that I know about is they determined that there were sinkholes under some of the properties. Well, they didn't have anything to take care of that. And so some of the owners had to come up with some extra money for that.
so if you were writing a contract for your buyer, would you always choose B?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So think about it. B makes the seller pay.
Right.
A makes the seller and the buyer pay. So you're right, but so why would you want to make your buyer pay anything? Make sense?
Yeah. That's the first time that's really sunk in.
Okay.
I'm sure you've explained that, a million times in the last 3 years and
Yeah, I
how it
don't think
makes
I had
sense.
a lot of conversation, but I see it all the time.
Right.
And so, so again, likely there's nothing that means nothing because there's no assessments. But if
Right.
there is, and we've had situations where the sellers didn't realize or remember they had an assessment and they checked that they didn't have one on the seller's disclosure, and then come to find out there is one. Title company finds out that there is an assessment. Theoretically, the buyer could move to cancel the contract because that was some material fact that they should have been informed of. But if you check B, then it's like, well, you're going to take care of it anyways, and we're good to go.
Scott, can I ask a question about the condo thing?
Mhm.
Being new, I've only done one complete transaction with real property, and it was a condo. the buyer who I was representing was denied financing because the condo association did not have the main insurance, they called it, where that would cover the roof. Is that not a standard thing for condos to have? And I know it's off topic, but I just was confused a little bit. I thought that condo associations are required to have that main insurance to cover repairs of the community properties.
I would say that in most I mean, in condos that I'm aware of, then they should have proper insurance to cover that, yes.
Okay,
So,
but they're not required. It's not like a state law or anything.
well, it's all whatever, and when they make their bylaws and all that stuff, then
Okay,
it should be outlined in there, roofs are not insured or covered.
so just make sure you check it.
That's why, so, just so you understand, the condominium, you need, if you're representing a seller in a condominium complex, you need to have all that documentation ready to give to a buyer immediately, because they get 15 days, I think it is, to cancel based on reading that information. So if you're not giving it to them right away, you're harming your seller by giving them an out.
Okay,
So you want to deliver it right away. And what are the things you need? The declaration, the docs, and the last year of financials, full year.
okay,
It's
Thank you.
stated in the addendum. And you want confirmation from the buyer's agent that they've received that information, so that you have a time to start calculating their 15 days right to rescind the contract.
okay.
And so now let's look at it on the other side. As a buyer, you might choose to thumb through that as the agent to see if there's anything like unusual. Oh, they don't have to insure the roof. That's something I might want to share with my buyer. You encourage the buyer to read that stuff. I can only tell you that most of the time, the agent don't look at it and the buyer don't look at it. And then all of a sudden, there's a problem.
Uh-huh.
The buyer has a pickup truck, and unfortunately, they don't allow pickup trucks and parked in the driveways inside the complex. Now it's an issue, and who's your customer gonna blame? Can't blame you. Especially if every time you met up with them to show them property, they were in their pickup truck.
Yeah,
It happens. So it's not your responsibility to read it for them, but it is somewhat your responsibility to, just to thumb through it to represent them in the best manner. Plus, I think all of us should want to get educated on the communities that we try to do business in, so that we know the ins and outs. So if I'm gonna sell a condominium and my buyers only want a condominium, by having more knowledge, I can help direct them right to the right condominium complex that best fits them. Okay. But these are where things can go wrong. It's a
Thank you.
thick document. It's not usually 2 pages or something like that. It can be 100 pages. But there should be an index so you could jump right to restriction section. So what are the restrictions? What are the coverages? What do they pay for? Do they do the outside maintenance, and what does the customer have to pay for? Those are your bigger parts of it. So anything else? So hopefully you took away a few solid tips when you're negotiating for yourself at a listing appointment. When you're negotiating on behalf of a buyer on a contract or a seller, and it can be different. So, and one of the big ones was the escrow deposit. I'm representing a buyer, I'll throw $1,000 on the contract. Likely it'll get accepted. If I'm representing a seller, let's ask for 1%. You may have to negotiate it down. Maybe you have a good strong offer price wise and stuff, but they're just insistent that they're only gonna put $1,000 deposit. Well, that's a consideration that you have to make at that point then. Or whether or not to accept it. But you can always try. That's the thing. If you don't try, you're not going to, 50% of them won't end up with a 1% deposit. They'll all be at 1,000. So I can assure you that if you try some of these tips and techniques, that a percentage of your business will be at the terms that you've decided to try to negotiate. And there will be sometimes that it will have worked out in the correct favor of your customer or yourself. All right, well, we'll leave it there, and I appreciate you all, and thank you very much for joining me. Hopefully I gave you some value today and give you some solid tips. So that's what I try to do. Thank you very much, and you enjoy the rest of your week. Take care.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank
Have a
you.
good day.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.